Good evening, everyone. Appreciate everyone making it here. We've got a pretty good crowd. I see the numbers still going up here. So we'll give it one more minute. Just a couple housekeeping notes before I kick it off to Tammy Ashby. Go ahead and keep your cameras and your microphones muted while Susan Adam goes through a PowerPoint presentation. We're going to have time at the end for Q&A. And then, of course, you can always use the reactions feature on here to raise hand if you have questions throughout. With that, Tammy, do you want to kind of start things off?
Absolutely. Good evening. As of today, I am officially your past president. We changed the passing of the guard today. So I just want to thank you all for being here to learn more about the Audiology and Speech Language Pathology Interstate Compact. That's quite a mouthful. It's the ASLP-IC. You'll see that written a lot. During this past year as president, I have learned so much about the Interstate Compact. We've been watching it for a few years, the conception of it. And as soon as 10 states became involved, it really took off. I'm very excited for you to learn about it also. Joining this compact would allow Illinois speech language pathologists and audiologists to have practicing privileges in the other compact states. So for any of you who have dealt with Illinois licensure recently, you know what a huge benefit that would be for us in our profession. Before I pass this off to your new president, I have to say a huge thank you to Susan Adams. She has been so gracious and been there for every step of the way for us at ISHA. She has volunteered to be on evenings Zooms to educate people, to talk to people at IDFPR for us, and has really been instrumental in moving this along. So Susan, thank you for helping us so much this past year. So with that, I want to pass this on to your new ISHA president, Maria Claudia Franca, and I will let her introduce Susan Adams.
Hello, everyone. Good evening to all. I'm Maria Claudia Franca, initiating this current cycle serving as acting president of ISHA. We appreciate everyone's engagement and participation tonight. We are grateful for Susan Adams' expertise and guidance in this important professional advocacy. Susan Adams is the Director for State, Legislative, and Regulatory Affairs at ASHA. She is responsible for advancing the public policy objectives of ASHA by serving as team lead and policy expert on state legislation and regulations affecting speech-language pathologists, audiologists, and consumers. Susan received her bachelor's degree in business administration from Towson University and her Juris Doctor from the University of Baltimore School of Law. Susan holds the American Society of Association Executives Certified Credential. Welcome, Susan. Thank you so much. And let's have a productive town talk.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I hope I'm going to share my screen. All right. Now I am sharing my screen. I'm going to leave myself off camera now so that you guys can just focus on the presentation, and then we can go on camera and have some Q&A. Brian, because I do have my presentation on screen, if you see any hands raised, if you could go ahead and let me know along the way if there are any questions. I'm happy to take questions during the presentation or after we finish.
Not a problem. I'll monitor the chat.
So as Tammy mentioned, the Audiology and Speech Language Pathology Interstate Compact is quite a mouthful. You know, we tried to come up with some clever acronym for it, but it just didn't work. So now we're stuck with ASLP-IC, but we felt like that, you know, we wanted to make sure that we involved, obviously, both of the professions, made it very clear that this compact was for both of the professions. And so that's how we decided to name it. So to begin with, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what is an interstate compact in itself. So an interstate compact is really just a contract between two or more states, and it allows states to cooperatively address shared problems. It allows states to maintain the sovereignty over state issues, and it responds to national priorities with one voice. So the most common interstate compact that you've never heard of is the driver's license compact. And that is an agreement between all 50 states that says if you have a driver's license in one state, we will allow you to use that driver's license to drive in another state without having to get a new driver's license. Out of the field of license, out of the field of interstate compacts, we have a subspecialty of occupational licensing compacts. And these were created really just to improve licensure portability, to improve public health and safety, and to preserve state authority over licensing issues. The federal government was really making a push towards trying to get to improve licensure portability, and they were looking at different ways to do that. And the profession started thinking to themselves, if we let the federal government do this, we are going to lose the authority over these professions, and states didn't want to lose authority over their professions, over occupational licensing. So we all came together and decided, let's look at these interstate licensing compacts to see if that's a way that we can help improve licensing portability without having to get the federal government involved. The first occupational licensing compact created was the nurse licensure compact, and that's been in effect for over 20 years now. So compacts by the numbers. Compacts have really just been a booming business in the last few years. As I mentioned, the nurse licensure compact has been in effect for over 20 years. There are currently 9 active interstate compacts for occupational licensing, and there's a handful more that are kind of on the way. But at least 48 jurisdictions, and I say jurisdictions because it includes not just the 50 states, but the District of Columbia, American Samoa, Guam, and Puerto Rico. So some of these jurisdictions have even adopted the compacts. So 48 jurisdictions have adopted at least one of those 9 compacts. 36 of the jurisdictions have adopted at least 3, and 20 jurisdictions have adopted at least 6. And since the conception of the Audiology and Speech Language Pathology Interstate Compact, these numbers have grown exponentially. Over 230 pieces of legislation have passed since 2016. So that's 6 years. We've had 230 pieces of legislation passed for interstate compacts. As I mentioned, there are 9 current occupational licensing compacts. And I mentioned the nurse licensure compact being the oldest one of these. They have 39 jurisdictions, followed by the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact, which is the Physicians Compact, which also has 39 jurisdictions. And then we have the Physical Therapy Compact and the Psychology Compact, which have 34 jurisdictions. And then comes our compact. We are now at 23 jurisdictions. Followed closely by the OTs with 22, the EMS Licensure Compact with 22, and the newer compact, the Counseling Compact, has 17 already. The Advanced Practice Nurse Compact has 3. They actually had a compact previously, but it was very troublesome and they ended up having to rewrite it. So they're kind of back in the States to try to pass a new compact. So Illinois is a member of the Physicians Compact, the IMLC, and the Psychology Compact, PsyPac. So we're really encouraging Illinois to get involved in some of these additional compacts that would make sense for them. Again, compacts under development, we have lots that are coming down the road. Several of these, the ones with the asterisks, are under an agreement with the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense thinks that interstate compacts are the most important way that we can help military and military spouses as they're moving every 2 to 3 years when they get a change of service. So they're really putting their money where their mouth is, and they are helping fund the development of interstate compacts. So this is a map of the current status of interstate compacts along, throughout the country. So you can see Illinois is 1 to 3 compacts because we know they have 2, but these dark states, they have more than 6 compacts, and that's really incredible. And as I said, that it's changed drastically in just the last few years. You'll also notice there's a few states that have 0 compacts, and there are different reasons for that. Some of them are just a dislike of compacts, so to speak. Some of them are union issues, especially with the nursing compact, where they don't want to pass the nursing compact. The nursing unions don't want to pass the nursing compact. And so the legislature feels like if they pass any other compacts, then there will be pressure to pass the nursing compact, and they don't want to do that. So we're starting to make a little headway. California is going to have a couple of bills next year to introduce compacts. Alaska could possibly be introducing our compact. New York is going to have some bills to pass compacts. So we're really getting to that tipping point, I think, where all of the states are going to end up kind of adopting these compacts. So the benefits for practitioners in general is it authorizes practice in other member states. So you get a license in one state and you practice in other member states without having to go through the whole licensure process, the whole continuing education process, all the paperwork, the administrative work. It all It also improves licensure portability. Again, we want people to be able to practice across state lines and through telehealth. It also reduces that effort needed to maintain individual state licenses. So we know that, if you have more than one state license, those state licenses could be on a different timeline. You could have a different amount of continuing education that you need to renew that license. We know that there are fees involved in all of this stuff. We have had stories of military spouses who, have had 10 different licenses. We know stories of occupational audiologists who have had 40 different state licenses. And the burden of having to maintain all of those licenses, the administrative burden and the monetary burden of having to maintain all of those state licenses can be overwhelming. And obviously we want to take advantage of these new telehealth opportunities. Since COVID has come into play, lots more states are passing telehealth legislation and allowing for telehealth. So we want to take advantage of that and say, we can do that through the compact also. So it's not just practicing across state lines, it's practicing across the country. So for the consumers, we're really increasing that access to healthcare, especially through telehealth. So we're reaching those rural areas where there is a lack of providers. We're also able to have people with specialties help out in those areas where there isn't a specialist. So it really is increasing that access to care, which is the top goal, I think, of the interstate compacts and the top goal, I think, of the federal government when they want to see these increased access happen. So if we can show that this is happening through an interstate compact, we don't have to worry about the federal government coming in and trying to tell states what to do. It also promotes practitioner diversity. So you can get services maybe from somebody who is better aligned with your culture, rather than having to, just use the person next door. Or again, if you're trying to find somebody with that specialty that you need, you're able to find that person. It improves the continuity of care because especially during COVID, we heard a lot about families, leaving the state during COVID, or, and then now that we're back, going to college. And how does an SLP or an audiologist maintain that continuity of care when the person that they're servicing has moved out of state? And the Interstate Compact is the answer to that. And I already mentioned the increased access to specialists. So for licensing boards and state agencies, the compact is great because it helps states retain control of their scope of practice. In the compact, you always have to follow the scope of practice of the state in which you are practicing in. So you are doing telehealth into Illinois, you have to follow the Illinois Practice Act. And it's on the provider to know what that scope of practice is. In the same way that if they were getting a license from the state of Illinois, they would be required to know what the scope of practice is in Illinois. It's the same through the compact. States would still retain control of licensure, of that initial licensure. That is always the case for a home state license. It's only the privilege to practice that is given once you have an initial license that the compact comes into play. The compact would also facilitate an exchange of information about licensure and disciplinary information through a database. So states will be connected to each other. They will always know who is practicing in their state. And it really improves cooperation in regulating the profession among the states. So there's a couple of different models for interstate compacts. There's the mutual recognition model, which is a multi-state license, which is what the nurse licensure compact has. So you get a multi-state license and you can practice in any compact state. There's the mutual recognition privilege to practice model, which is what the PT compact is currently using. And then that's the model that we are using also. So you have your home state license and you get a privilege to practice in other compact states where you want to practice. The interstate medical licensure compact really is just expedited licensure. So a physician can join that compact, and what it does is the physician would get a full state license in every state that they want to practice in, but it's just expedited. But they would have to pay whatever those fees are in each state and complete all the continuing education and everything for each state. And then there's SIPACT, which is just a telehealth model. So SIPACT doesn't talk about working across state lines. It only talks about telepsychology. So what's the ASLP-IC? So we are a mutual recognition occupational licensure compact. So we specifically created this compact to address increased demands of service for providing that service and receiving that services. We authorize both telehealth and in-person practice across state lines. And it's very similar to all the other 8 occupational licensing compacts that are currently in effect. We went through a really long and kind of arduous process to develop this compact. We've been working on this since 2017. That's when we first brought together our initial advisory group. And this phase process that we use came from the Council of State Governments, who are our partners in developing the Interstate Compact. The Council of State Governments is a nonpartisan governmental organization that works with all the states. And so they really developed this idea of the Interstate Licensure Compact. So we contracted with them in 2017 to help us develop this Interstate Compact. So we had this advisory group, and this was about a group of 20 people who came together, and they were SLPs and audiologists. They were licensing board members. They were legislators and attorneys who came together and said, okay, if we decide to use this, to go this way, what would this look like? Would this work for us? Is this something we should be doing? So we had lots of discussions about that, and they had work sessions where we would talk about these issues of how we would, how each piece of this would work and what those requirements should be. So in 2018, the advisory group presented this set of recommendations to the drafting team. The drafting team was made up of a subset of the advisory group. There was about 8 people on that drafting team. And they took that advisory group's set of recommendations and they turned it into a draft interstate compact. Then we presented this back to stakeholders. So we had over 60 calls with state regulatory boards, with practitioners, specialty groups, and membership associations. So everybody and anybody who wanted input on this could have input. The drafting team then took that stakeholder review back and incorporated the changes that made sense into the Interstate Compact. And in March of 2019, it was approved by the advisory group that initial group that came, that helped develop those recommendations. So for a state to join the Interstate Compact, they all have to have the same licensure requirements. And that is the standard licensure requirements that every state already has, and that ASHA has for our certificate of clinical competence. So an audiologist, you have to have a doctoral degree or a master's before December 31st, 2007. You have to have had a supervised clinical practicum and passed that national exam. SLPs had the same. They also had to have that clinical fellowship. And then both practices have to have an active, unencumbered license. So you can't have been convicted or found guilty of a felony related to the practice. You have to have a valid social security number or an NPI number, and that's for the data system so that we could track people who have privileges. And you have to have an FBI fingerprint-based criminal background check. And that was just a public safety issue, so that we could ensure that each state, that the people who might be coming to practice in their state aren't bad actors, basically. So states would still have control over the practice within its borders. They would retain control of their practice act, of their scope of practice, over licensure and discipline of their licensees. State boards could also act against a privilege holder in the same manner as they would an in-state licensee. So if somebody did something wrong in the state, they could take action against them. And then states would charge a privilege fee to kind of recoup some of that cost that they might have lost from people not getting a full state license. So the compact is really just another pathway to practice. If you think about a state licensing board, you might have a full license process. You might have an option for reciprocity. You might have an option for, if you have your ASHA-Cs, to make it easier for you to get a license. So that's really all that the compact is doing. We're just trying to make it easier for people to get a license to practice in another state. So what happens if there is an adverse action, if we do have a bad actor? So a home state can only take action against people, somebody's license. So your home state license, where you live, work, have your driver's license, can take an action against your license. The remote state can only take an action on a privilege to practice. So if somebody does something wrong, the state can still discipline that person. However, the difference is, because we call it a privilege to practice, if a home state does take an adverse action and that person's license is terminated, they lose all privileges to practice in the remote states. And that's because the home state license is your way to access the compact. If you no longer have a home state license, you no longer have access. Conversely, if a privilege to practice is revoked because of an adverse action, every other state where a privilege is held and the home state license can determine if they want to revoke that privilege or that license based on the action in another state. So this is where we say this really expands consumer protection and expands public protection, because we want to make sure that we keep these bad actors out of the compact. For a practitioner to join the compact, they have to be licensed in their home state. And you don't have to join the compact. It's completely voluntary. So you have to have a home state license in the state where you live, work, have your driver's license, pay your taxes. Your home state license has to be in good standing. You can't have any adverse actions, again, related to the felony or a felony related to the practice within the previous 2 years. And for active duty military personnel or their spouses, we let them designate a home state where they have a license in good standing. And that's because we know how difficult it is, again, for military and military spouses to have to move every couple of years and maintain those licenses. This compact, our compact, was actually was drafted in part by people from the Department of Defense State Liaison Office who work to help military spouses and the military as they're moving through the states. So our compact was actually the first state to actually include them in the drafting and helping to craft this language for military spouses and military personnel. And again, the compact would communicate and exchange this information, including a verification of licensure and disciplinary actions before a privilege to practice was issued. So again, I mentioned that we have this mutual recognition model, this compact privilege. So I have to say, this is what we believe it will look like, because we haven't developed the database yet. But the idea is that an audiologist or an SLP would decide to obtain a compact privilege. They would go to the website, see which other compact states are there, see if there's any jurisprudence requirements in those states, and pay their fees. Then they could log in, automatically verify compact eligibility, and purchase a compact privilege. And then you would receive notification in the email that you're authorized to practice in a member state. You know, that process could take as little as 10 minutes, depending on how robust the database is that would be developed for this compact. And I say that because there are different databases. Some of them are very robust. The PT compact is very robust. The nurse licensure compact is very robust. The psychology compact database is not quite as robust. So it might take a couple of days rather than a couple of minutes to get that compact privilege. But the idea is that it's going to take less time than a state licensing board, and it's going to be an easier process. So the compact privilege is equivalent to a license issued by a remote state. We view it as the same. We just call it something different. The privilege would renew at the same time as your home state license. So you wouldn't have to track the renewal times for each state where you had a privilege to practice. If you renewed your home state license, you would renew your privilege to practice, and everything would continue. Your continuing education is only based on your home state license, unless it relates to a scope of practice issue in another state. So you wouldn't have to maintain all that information for continuing education for multiple states. You just renew your home state license, and you can renew your compact privileges. And as I mentioned before, practitioners must abide by the scope of practice in the state where you hold the privilege. So there was two areas that we couldn't quite figure out the way that we wanted to. Compacts really thrive on uniformity. So that's why it was easy to do this with state licensing standards, because the states already agreed upon what the license, what the requirements were to get a license. There's educational experience and testing requirements. But there was a couple of areas where they didn't have that uniformity. And one of them was with school-based practices. So there's about 20-ish states that require one license regardless of setting. The rest of the states require you to have a school-based license to practice in the school system. So if a person wants to work in a state where they require a separate license to work in a school, they would still have to obtain that separate license. They can get into the state with a state board license, but if they were going to work in the school, they have to get that separate certification. So in the chart here, you can see if the home state is a one license state and the remote state is a one license state, you can just use the privilege to practice. But if you're trying to get a privilege into a remote state that has a license or certification from the Department of Education, you still have to get that requirement. In the last line, you'll see that if the home state requires a DOE license or certification and the remote state requires one license, you can get a privilege to practice. You would have to get a home state license, though, through your state licensing board to access the compact. The other area that we had problems with was dispensing audiologists. So again, if a state requires you to have a separate license or certification to dispense hearing aids, you would still have to get that in order to dispense hearing aids in that state. If the state doesn't require it, you can simply do it through the privilege to practice. So we're kind of in the phase 2 development now. Phase 1 was creating the compact language. Phase 2 is implementing the compact language. So that's what we're currently doing. So you can see the states that have passed in each year. As I mentioned, we have 23 states that we have currently passed the legislation, and we have about a dozen states on our list for 2023 that we're going to be pushing, especially in those states. This is the current map of the states where we do have legislation. As you can see, in Illinois, a bill was introduced this year to adopt the compact. It was not done with the knowledge of ASHA or ISHA or anyone else. It was brought to a legislator by an SLP who said, I want Illinois to join this compact. She gave that bill to her legislator, and the legislator introduced it. So, we've been trying to do some work with the licensing board and with the other organizations in the state to get support for this legislation, but we don't know if we're there yet, which is why we're doing some sort of, some of this educational outreach to let people in Illinois know about the compact and what it does and doesn't do. You'll see that New York also has a bill. The New York bill wasn't introduced in a format that is acceptable. So although they have introduced a bill to adopt the compact, if that bill passed, it wouldn't actually adopt the compact. So we have some work to do there with the legislators to ensure that they are introducing the right language for that compact. So I mentioned we were in phase 2. We're kind of in phase 3 too. I think as mentioned early on, I think Tammy mentioned when you reach that, we had a 10-state threshold for our compact. So 10 states had to adopt the compact for it to begin its transition to operation. So that happened in the middle of 2021. So since then, we have been transitioning to that operational aspect. So each state that had passed the compact have appointed an audiologist and a speech language pathologist to the compact commission. Those delegates have been meeting. We had our initial compact commission meeting in January of this year. All of the states were represented there. And at that meeting, we really just seated everybody and we adopted some basic commission bylaws and we elected officers. So the Audiology and Speech Language Pathology Interstate Compact Commission is a quasi-governmental agency. So it rises above the state. So it's super state, but sub-federal. So, we don't rise to the level of the federal government, but it's a little bit higher than the state government because it is an interstate compact. But it really is a quasi-governmental agency. It's not represented by any private organizations. It is run by members of the state licensing board in the states that are members. So right now we've been meeting, we have 3 committees that meet every month. The executive committee, which is made up of, again, the chair, the vice chair, the secretary, the treasurer, and ex officios. We have the finance committee, which is currently working on a budget for the compact commission or the compact to operate. And then we have the rules committee, which is meeting to establish rules by which implement the commission language. In a similar way that a state licensing board does, your state has the statute, which is our compact language, and then it has the regulations and rules, which we also have rules. All of these agendas and meeting minutes are shared on the compact website. All of these meetings are open to the public. So if you ever want to join a meeting, you're free to do so. You just need to log into that compact website and sign up for the meeting so that you'll get the login information, the Zoom information. So as I mentioned, we have a compact commission right now. It is supra-state sub-federal. It is statutorily created. It is a statutorily created governmental entity. As I mentioned, we are a quasi-governmental entity, and it's made up of members of state regulatory officials. It is not a private entity. And it really is an instrumentality of the states. So the states make all of the decisions of what the compact is going to do and what it is not going to do. The compact commission does a lot of things. As I mentioned, they're made up of voting representatives from each member state. They're responsible for all the key decisions related to the compact. And they really do have the legal status of an administrative agency with rulemaking authority. They have created committees. They're going to continue to create more committees as they decide they're needed. They are going to create, or they're going to form committees. They're going to hire staff. So there'll be an executive director for the compact to help run the day-to-day operations. And they really, again, work on behalf of all of the states. They don't work on behalf of any group or organization. And I would mention, ASHA's involvement in the compact. We were asked by our members, what are you doing about licensure portability? And so we said, we're going to look into this. We ended up writing, having that contract with the Council of State Governments. So we're funding the process, but we don't oversee the process. It's not our compact. The compact is for and by the states. ASHA is just funding it because we are in a position to do that. But we don't have any input. We don't get to tell the compact what to do. We do have an ex officio seat on the executive committee along with AAA right now. And so, we are all working collaboratively just to make this compact a success. And we'll continue to help do that for the next several years until the compact can stand on its own. So there's my contact information. If you want to reach out for more information, feel free to do so. I am going to stop sharing my screen now and I can answer questions. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask or raise your hand, however you want to do it.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
And if I can go ahead. So thank you for a wonderful presentation. I guess I'm still not clear on the current status of the compact. So there are 10 initial states. There are now currently 23 states. But at this point in time, is there a possibility for a speech language pathologist or audiologist to have privileges in these other states? Or this is still in formation? I guess I don't quite have the status right now of it all.
So currently it is not operational yet. And that is because we are still in the process of drafting the rules, creating a budget for the commission to operate under, and we have to create a database. So the database is the big lift where, we have to find the money. The commission has to find the money to create the database, and then go through all the work of making sure that all the states can talk to each other and provide the information that the compact needs. So we're hoping that will happen in the next 12 months. But that's what they're working on right now.
Yeah. Okay. So you expect about a 12-month timeline then until it begins to be operational. Of course, Illinois can't be a part of it until the legislation passes it. But for those that already have the legislation, it would be about a year.
Right. And if Illinois were to pass legislation, they could immediately join the compact. I mean, as soon as the technical aspects of just getting the databases to talk to each other. But once that happens, it wouldn't be a long wait for Illinois to begin using the compact.
Thank you.
Susan, if I can add in, we really wanted Susan to come to share this information, and it's recorded, and we hope to send out some more reminders for other, more of our membership to hear this and be educated. And then we're going to do a poll. We're going to send out a poll to our members and see what kind of support we have. And if we have an abundant level of support, then we would try to find a legislator that would support that bill and put that into action. It probably cannot happen this fall. I talked to Jim, our amazing lobbyist, but maybe in the spring. So we'll be sending something out to membership within probably the next month or two to see where our support lies for membership so we can move forward.
And Jim, there's actually a question in the chat about an update on the legislation. Does it look like it's going to pass? Is IDFPR supportive? I don't know if Tammy or Jim, you want to address that issue?
Jim, correct me if there is no legislation pending right now. It was put forth last spring session, I believe. And it was, like we said, it was not, ISSHA did not bring it forward. It was a speech pathologist who was interested, very interested, and got a legislator to just put it forward. We were a little shocked, and that's why Susan was I was so grateful. We were literally like sitting there about 30 emails one day, and then got her on the phone to say, oh my gosh, ISSHA's really taken up a lot of your time, but what do we do and what's going on? So at this point, we want to poll our membership and see what's going on, and then we would look for legislation. Jim would help us with that, a legislator to support the bill and then put it forward and then see if we get it passed.
I do have another question if there's nobody else asking questions. It's the concept of a home state, I guess. So, of course, I don't see any downside from Illinois not, having this an issue supporting the legislation. But let's say it doesn't go through. And I'm a speech and language pathologist in Illinois. And I have a license in Illinois because this is where I practice. Can I go to another state, get a license in that other state that is part of the compact, and then join the compact because I am licensed in that second state as well? How is that going to kind of work?
So unfortunately, your state has to pass the compact in order for you to be able to access it. The only people that kind of get a pass are military and military spouses, but everybody else has to have a license from the state that has passed the compact, their home state.
Susan, this is Jim Morphew. I apologize. I couldn't get off mute for some reason when the question was raised before, but Tammy accurately explained the status of the legislation, both in terms of how it came about, as you aptly described as well. But there's nothing active right now. And I would anticipate the need to file a bill when the new General Assembly begins in January of 2023.
So I also received a message in the chat from Raina asking if the compact becomes up and running, would SLPs need to apply to it, or would they be in the database automatically? And so the answer is that you would have to apply to it. It does not automatically include everybody who is licensed in the state of Illinois. So you would have to choose to join the compact. And Kathleen asks, what's the likely cost for a multi-state license? So we don't know yet. We would hope that it would be less than it would be for a home state license. There would be two fees that you would have to pay to get a privilege of practice. One would be to the Compact Commission, and one would be to the state where you want to get that license. Right now, the only compact that is actually charging money for that is the PT compact, and they charge, I believe it's $45 for each. So you would pay $45 to the compact and $45 to the state. So that would be $90. So that's kind of the idea of what we would probably be looking at also. But again, we can't say for sure until the commission has their budget set up, has the database set up, has figured out, what it needs to charge people in order to make this a success. But we understand, that our members don't, we're not doctors. We don't make that kind of money. So we need to keep those costs reasonable so that people can actually use the compact. So Carrie asked if ISHA SLPs are largely in favor of this, what is our biggest barrier and how do we overcome it? And I don't know, Tammy, if you want to address this based on the meetings that we've had earlier in the year.
Sure. The ILAA, which is the Illinois Audiological Association, they had some concerns when it was put forward, and through their concerns, they brought up some very good questions and brought us all to the table together, which was a good thing. And Susan, that's when she was really instrumental in explaining, what was going on and how it was going to work. And a lot of the questions they had were detailed rules kinds of questions, like how is everything going to work? And that wasn't determined yet. So I believe, and correct me, Susan, if I'm wrong, a large portion of this is trust. And you're trusting when you join this compact that people are going to do the right thing. And we're, all in this to just better our profession. So we don't have all of the details of the rules, but we can see that safeguards are being put in place for adverse actions. There will be ways to take care of situations if they should arise. I believe, I don't want to speak for them, but I know in our conversations, some of the concerns were this isn't figured out yet. So I don't want to speak for ISHA completely right now, but I believe if our survey comes back that we are largely in support of the Interstate Compact as an association, we would be able to move forward with legislation. That's my hope.
So we had a question on research if this impacts salaries in similar occupations where they have a compact. We haven't seen any of that play out in other compacts. I know one of the issues that other compacts have been concerned about is if this will bring in like telehealth companies into the state. Will there be a rush of people coming into Illinois and taking the jobs of locals? And we've just not seen that happen in any of the other compacts, so we can't imagine it would happen with this compact. One of my colleagues from the Council of State Governments have says that telehealth companies have already based their structure, their business model on providing telehealth services the way that it currently is now, with having to pay for those state licenses, to have to jump through all of those hoops. We don't think that this is, an interstate compact is going to change what they do, or we don't feel like it's going to have a, growth of practitioners coming in just because the compact is there. We feel like, it's just an easier way to practice. We don't think it's going to have a drastic change on, how people practice or how much they get paid or losing of jobs or anything like that. Megan says if an Illinois SLP worked with a lawmaker and submitted something this spring, why are we rewriting and resubmitting for the near future? So I would defer to Tammy and Jim, but with the state legislature, if the bill doesn't pass this year, it has to be reintroduced. It doesn't carry over, so that legislation would have to be reintroduced.
Susan, that's correct. This General Assembly expires in January of 2023, early in the month, and the new legislature is sworn in, and you start with a new set of legislation. House Bill 1 is filed, and that's the first bill of that General Assembly, and the same thing in the Senate. I do recall that the legislator that filed the bill is Representative Mark Walker from the Arlington Heights area. I do believe he had an earlier version of the language that wasn't actually the final version that the committee had drafted and authorized. So, you know, it was just a situation where, as has been discussed, a constituent of his who's an SLP read about this, thought it was a great idea, went to him, he thought it was a great idea, and he filed the bill. So but that bill, I'm certain, would not move. There's probably not even enough session days left procedurally to move that bill to passage.
So we had a question about how it would impact liability insurance. I don't think that it would. Again, this is just another pathway to practice. It's just another way to get a license in a state so that you can practice. So anything that you're doing currently with liability insurance would be the same with the compact. And then we had Carrie mention that she had heard that IDFPR is a big barrier, that they're not supportive of this, and what is their concern? I think Tammy kind of addressed some of those concerns, and I think maybe an overlap of ILAA and IDFPR personnel, you know, are I don't know, enhancing those concerns. Tammy, would you want to share anything else?
Yeah, it's my understanding IDFPR will not vote or decide or have a part in this process, correct, Susan? If the legislation passes, IDFPR does not vote on that. If they don't have any input. Would
Yeah,
you
I mean,
agree?
I would say the legislature could, and Jim, you might have a better sense of this. The legislature could go to IDFPR and say, what do you think about this bill?
Right.
And, you know, depending on what their opinion is, they might share that information with the legislature.
That's actually very common, especially on, you know, bills that directly affect licensure of professions. Their regular attendees at committee hearings often file a position on a bill. So I think their approval or sign off or at worst neutrality would be important.
And Susan, you spoke with IDFPR. Did you get the sense that the opposition was just in that we couldn't answer all those questions yet about rules and who would take care of an adverse action and things like that?
I think so, and we get that a lot from the state licensing boards. You know, that's definitely a concern with a lot of state licensing boards. And what we usually do is we say, go talk to the other licensing boards that have compacts that have passed. You know, like in Illinois, you know, the physicians compact and the psychology compact, go talk to those people, you know, the staff that run those boards, and ask them how it's going. You know, they can answer your questions, at least to see how it worked for them in Illinois. So, and that can, you know, inform how it would potentially work for this compact. I am not seeing any other questions in the chat. If I missed somebody, please let me know. And if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Hi.
Yes.
I have a quick question, Elaine Rao. If I have my license from the state of Illinois and my PEL from the state of Illinois, but I want to do telepractice in Wisconsin, and they require a state license and a state teaching certificate. If the interstate compact is approved by both states, I would still need the teaching certificate in Wisconsin?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, if there are no other questions, I will turn it back over to Maria Claudia or Tammy or Brian.
Thank you.
Brian.
No, I appreciate it, Susan. Thank you for the time this evening. This was great. Just so everyone knows, so I was recording this, so we'll post the recording on YouTube, social media, on our website. We'll email it out to everybody, and then also provide just a PDF of the PowerPoint slides along with Susan's information if you have any additional questions after the fact. And yeah, everyone have a great evening. Appreciate it.